Glossolalia, created, directed, and presented by Reverend Dr. Dickie Joe Mullen. Another word for glossolalia is speaking in tongues, and in this video Dr. Mullen not only looks at the more recent usage of glossolalia among Christian churches, but goes much farther back in history and notes that there's cross-cultural evidence that glossolalia has been around perhaps since the beginning of the human race.
Hello, this is parapsychologist, astrologer, and paranormal investigator coming to you from Orlando, Florida with a really, really great word, glossolalia. If you know what it means, you're in the minority. But if you don't, I get to tell you that what it means is speaking in tongues, languages of the divine and diabolical. Words, how potent for good or evil they become in the hands of one who knows how to combine them. Nathaniel Hawthorne, early American author of The House of the Seven Gables and other novels and writings, came up with that quote, and I really love it as approaching this topic of the supernatural power of language so eloquently described by him. It's equally respected by those who would follow the path of the mystic or the spiritual. Chanting to manifest a desired result can evolve through the course of a ritual to become a string of syllables, and it can assume a life of its own. Think of saying a tongue twister, tricky words, and they have to be repeated several times and mysteriously can trip up the speaker and become something entirely original and something entirely different. Repeating words several times can really become interesting. Interviewing immigrant or non-English speaking children, they'll often recount memories of attending a kindergarten, not understanding a single word the teacher was saying for weeks, and then suddenly all the nonsense syllables would become clear, and they were able to speak and understand an entirely new language, sometimes forgetting the mother tongue in the process entirely. These interesting but somewhat prosaic peculiarities hint at the deeper and hidden potentials inherent in language. Among these is the controversial practice of speaking in tongues. Tongues are sounds which mimic the cadence of familiar conversation when they're uttered, often in a trance state in an unknown language. The technical term for this is glossolalia. It comes from two Greek root words meaning tongue and the ability to talk. And there are three mysterious divisions within this phenomena of speaking in tongues. There's the purest form of glossolalia, when neither the speaker nor the listener can make any sense out of the sounds, but yet they sound like a language. Then there's heteroglossolalia, which occurs when an unfamiliar language is spoken, but the listener hears it in his or her native tongue. And then there's xenoglossolalia, when the speaker doesn't understand the language, but the person hearing it does. Upon witnessing speaking in tongues, many questions come to mind. Are the sounds spoken good or bad? Are they of God or the devil? Is it merely the imagination of the speaker at work? Is this an eccentric anomaly expressed by a few, or could anybody speak in tongues? Does this gift exist today, or is it shadowy in the distant past? Speaking in tongues is probably rooted in the earliest religions of Asia. Sorcerers in China and India would often communicate with mysterious and unintelligible words to their followers. Ancient Egypt records necromancers who would use a senseless series of noises which were thought to be coming from the gods. The historian Herodotus wrote of an inspired priest who suddenly began to speak in a barbaric tongue. In the Aeneid, Virgil also mentions a sibyl, a wise sorceress who spoke strangely and seemed spirit-possessed. Detailed early documentation of speaking in tongues can be traced to the Oracle of Delphi in Greece at about 400 BC. In return for making a generous donation to the Temple of Apollo, those seeking guidance could ask a single question of a pythoness. The pythoness wasn't a real snake, probably, but she was a mystical being who would pray at a cracked altar, which was poised above an earthquake fault, and soon she would become possessed of a frenzied dance and begin to babble incoherent utterances. A temple priest would then translate what the pythoness advised or spoke. She spoke in a sacred tongue which supposedly conveyed the words of Apollo. Many profound elements of Greek philosophy are said to have emerged from the babbling of the pythoness. Know thyself is one which has been repeated often through the ages. Recently, texts conducted of the air above that altar, the cracked altar, the fissure in it, showed that it emanated toxic fumes. There were toxic fumes emitted from deep below the Earth's surface, and this might literally have created a sort of high in the mind of the pythoness. Doctrines of the early Christian church accept glossolalia. By the 1800s, though, the practice could be found among the Quakers, Shakers, Mormons, Methodists, and Presbyterians, and there are many biblical references that support speaking in tongues. Although glossolalia is obviously not limited to Christianity, in contemporary times, speaking in tongues is usually associated with the Pentecostal religious services. Believers claim that they speak a heavenly language as a rule, although paradoxically some of their tongues are thought to be demonic. That doesn't, oh my goodness, I think I'm speaking in tongues. Demonic or heavenly. In 2006, a Dr. Andrew Newberg from the University of Pennsylvania conducted a study of several people who spoke in tongues, and this research was published in the New York Times. It was determined that brain imaging shows a number of changes when someone is speaking in tongues. Something is going on that isn't the usual thing. It isn't just faked or like a game. The test subjects would lose control of their usual language centers. While speaking in tongues, the frontal lobe of the brain, that's the part that we use to speak in a non-native language, went completely quiet. And this is consistent with descriptions the speakers gave of not being in intentional control. The faithful, the spiritual people who support glossolalia's authenticity of speaking in tongues took this university study to have proof that the language of tongue isn't fabricated. It comes from some kind of spiritual stimulus. Examples of glossolalia can be found among numerous different non-Christian religions today. These include the shamans of Greenland and Siberia, the Dayaks of Borneo, the Haida Native Americans of the Pacific Northwest, the Zor cult of Ethiopia, and the Chaco of South America, Tibetan monks, the Wiccans of November Eve witches chant. All these are examples of speaking in non-native tongues and glossolalia. Gerald Gardner, an historic figure who's been hailed as the father of modern witchcraft, first published in the 1950s a classic occult novel called High Magic's Aid. Here is a version of the witches' chant, which has appeared and been used in many rituals and by craft practitioners ever since. It's thought to be an authentic example of glossolalia that's been popularized and repeated. It goes like this: Iko Iko Azarak, Iko Iko Zamalak, Bazabia laka baka lama kaka baba karlios lamak lamak balakas kabios sabalas balaka lagos atha kalos samaka halafamos haraya. There's been some speculation that these words were really borrowed from Euskara, an ancient and complex language spoken among the Basques, but those few people on the planet who can read and speak Basque have no clear translation here. It's far more suggestive that this is a genuine example of glossolalia. In the behavioral science research data on glossolalia, there are several points to bear in mind when considering this phenomena. Glossolalia is an ancient and widespread phenomena among most societies. It occurs most often in connection with various religious beliefs. That's point number 1. 2, glossolalia may occur as a part of a larger condition of hysterical or dissociative trance states. It may occur when a person's completely alone. 3, glossolalia is not necessarily related to certain personality types. Number 4, it might be a deviant behavior, an abnormality of the mind, or it might be a normal expected behavior in certain social or cultural environments, say like being in a group chanting a spiritual chant or a religious service of other types. Number 5, glossolalia is a form of partially developed speech in which the thought-speech apparatus of the person is used for an internal mental function. And number 6, glossolalia may be a form of healthy regression in the service of the ego, leading to creative output. As working in the field of parapsychology, I came across an instance of glossolalia sometime back involving a teenage girl, and she and her family decided that it was an alien language. She would be sleeping and would be sound asleep and would start to speak not like a sleep speaker normally would, but in an entirely different language. And the family recorded it. They were really disturbed about this and went to some different linguists here in the Orlando area to see if they could figure out whether it was an ancient form of a modern language, like maybe Hebrew or German. And none of these occurred. It wasn't even a Native American tongue that anyone could find. And yet she would seem to be speaking it fluently. And the general conclusion, I'm not sure if I agree with this, but it's intriguing, is that aliens were coming through, and she was speaking and learning an alien language. Well, that's just another interesting twist to the phenomena of glossolalia, one of the really interesting facets of parapsychology. This is astrologer and paranormal investigator in Orlando, Florida. I have a number of different articles about the field of the paranormal, all for free on my website, Sky Maiden Musings, and also daily thoughts expressed on Facebook.